There's only one spiritual problem. And the mechanism of that problem is very, very simple. It consists of not recognizing what is the case and thinking some condition that is not the case is the case. So in short, you are holding things that are not true to be true, and you are not recognizing what is true. Now that all sounds sort of theoretical and philosophical, but what this refers to is simply what's going on in your experience in real time. So it's very pragmatic, it's very direct, it's very simple. The only possible, the only existent spiritual problem is to not recognize what your experience actually is, and to think it's something other than it actually is. In theoretical terms, the way to address that problem is extremely simple. Simply recognize what is the case, and since your experience is right here, it's available to investigate and to discover what it actually consists of. In practical terms, that can be a little more challenging, because typically we may not realize that what we're taking to be the case isn't, and we may not realize that what we're seeing does not conform to what we're thinking it is. The vast majority of this problem stems from semantic confusion, our use of language and ideas and concepts. We tend to think, we naively believe, as we've been taught since we were children, that if there's a word for something, then there's an object for that word. And of course there's, 15,000 words or whatever that are in common usage, and so the supposition is, well, there must be 15,000 things. In actuality, there's no things. So if you're expecting there to be all these things, and the fact that there are in actuality no things is going to cause a little bit of disjunction, a little bit of confusion, which is, of course, what we see. So things. We have all these wonderful nouns and verbs for all of these things. We have chairs and floors and people and rooms and towns and planets and atmospheres and go through the dictionary, and there's all of these words that are supposed to be various objects, various things, various conditions that are supposedly actually existing. And the world itself, objectivity, there's a nice word for you. The world, the universe. I mean, words can imply really big things. But the only thing that is here is experience. And what exactly is experience? Experience is subtle. Experience is slippery. Experience is subjective. Experience is, let's say it exists in consciousness alone. Experience is multidimensional. Experience is nonlinear. Experience is irrational. Experience makes no sense whatsoever. We can think of a dream. In a dream, say a dream you had last night, you may have thought there are all kinds of things, there's all sorts of events happening, there are people there, there's objects, you may be driving in cars or talking to people or flying in airplanes or who knows what, right? Whatever in the dream. And you may be thinking all of these things are more or less there, more or less doing what they do, and you're interacting with them in various ways. And then when you wake up, you think back and you realize, oh, this was all a dream. So there were no things there whatsoever. There were no people there whatsoever. You weren't even there. You may have seen yourself walking around in a dream. You weren't there walking around in a dream. You were dreaming the dream. And yet all the descriptions, oh, last night I had this great dream. I was in Hawaii and the Dalai Lama came down and, and blah, 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 blah. We went water skiing and, but all of those descriptions are inaccurate. The real description is a dream happened. That was the actual event. There were no people there. There were no events. There were no places there. There were no things. There were no objects. There was a dream. What is a dream? Well, we can't say exactly, can we? You can describe it as an apparition in consciousness, a virtual presentation of an apparent, information-dense scenario of apparent forms that in actuality have no existence except as appearances or something. I mean, who knows what? It doesn't really matter. But what there aren't in the dream are any things. What there aren't in the dream are any actual events other than the event of dreaming. The one event that happens in a dream is dreaming. Talking never happens, moving never happens, flying never happens, fighting never happens, running never happens. Just dreaming is the only actual event. And how easy it is to misinterpret that, to think, oh yeah, I was this and I was that, and all this narration. Not true. Didn't happen. Nothing like that was there. That description is entirely and completely wrong, inaccurate, not true. And the actual description, which is more true, a dreaming occurred, or dreaming seemed to appear in consciousness, is the only semi-accurate description you come up with. And the same thing is true here. The same thing is true in this, what we call waking life, or any experience whatsoever. The only semi-true description you can make of it is an experiencing seemed to appear. An experiencing seemed to be happening. And oh no, we're in Berkeley and we're sitting in the Hillside Club and we're, in this room and there's these silly lights on and there's music happening and there's some guy talking and, we're sitting around in chairs and later on we're going to go do whatever and all blah, 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 blah. It's all wrong. It's all false. It's all fantasy. And it's fine as an addressing of the way it appears to be. But it's not fine as a summation of something that actually is the case. And there's a huge difference between holding it that way. Take the example of being in a body. I mean, most people probably think they're in their body. Most people think, well, yeah, I'm in this body. I am this body. Most people probably think they're a byproduct of the body. Well, the body works, and so as a result of a byproduct of all this biochemistry, consciousness somehow flickers into apparition, and then I'm there kind of riding this consciousness, and it's all precariously being balanced on the functioning of the body, like it's a robot or a machine that's churning out, individuality, churning out experiencing as a byproduct of it. But in actuality, the body appears in experience. And it's not a thing. It's a confluence of an incredible range of textures of experience, let's say, that are continually varying, continually inconsistent, have essentially no coherence, and don't exist at all with any degree of separation from the confluence of all other qualities that are appearing within experience. But you can, and the same analysis applies to anything whatsoever that you hold your experience to actually consist of, is a similar argument, taking a superficial description of circumstantial coincidence as being an objectively existing structural entity that has coherence. When the only thing that is appearing is experiencing. What is experiencing? Well, you can't say, can you? It's subtle, it's weird, it's strange. It comes from nowhere, exists in nothing. What's holding it up? What's your experience resting on? What's holding up your experience? What's it floating in? Where's it coming from? Where's it going to? Where is it at all? Where is experience happening? Well, it's happening here. Okay, cool. Where is here? What's here in? What does here exist in relationship to? I don't know. It's pretty weird. What's a dream happen? Where's a dream happen? Where exactly? You dreamed last night maybe, right? Where exactly did it happen? Oh, it happened in my head. Did it? Did it happen in your head? Where did it happen? It happened in consciousness. Well, cool. Where's that? You know? I mean, all of these sort of pseudo-descriptions that we can so easily and glibly come up with, that if we look at them closely, they just don't hold up. They don't hold water. They don't say anything. They just are substituting one unknown for another unknown, as if you've come up with a positive statement, as if you've come up with, yeah, that's the answer. But our great advantage is that experience is actual. Experience is actually experience, and it's right here. It's not hidden. It can be investigated. It can be looked at. It can be seen to be what it consists of, what it actually is. Of course, you won't be able to say what it is, but you can see what it is. You can come to know what it is most profoundly. And especially you can come to notice that it is not what people in general say it is. And the implication of this knowing is profound. It completely reorients yourself to your world. It reorients yourself to yourself. It reorients everything. And the implications are profound. So that's my sermon for the night. Can I hear a thank you? We can have a little chat now. If you're a newcomer, if you wouldn't mind speaking into a microphone, that way people who might be following along online can hear what you have to say. And if you're not speaking, or if we're not speaking, I suggest you sit with your experience and look and see what it is. It's right here, it's happening. It's not hidden. No aspect of experience whatsoever is hidden. It's all completely, nakedly displayed. Maybe we can hide the mic in a football and you can sort of... Cricket ball, there you go.
So it seems a little bit loud. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. You can hold it down a few inches. Yeah, there you go. Try that. How's that?
All right. So you were saying that experience is dreamlike, and that it is a fantasy. How one experiences things is not actually the way they exist.
No. How you experience them is how they exist, and there's no them. How you experience is what exists. And it's not a fantasy at all, it's real. Our challenge is that what we interpret that as being, generally speaking, is fantasy, and is not true. And typically we don't know the difference. We can't discriminate. We think that our interpretations are objectively true. So essentially it's like crazy people, because we think things that are not the case are the case, and we aren't aware that we're doing that.
Right. I'm trying to get a feel. I'm trying to explore how that's happening in my own case. How you said one might be sitting here. I'm in Berkeley. I'm listening to a talk, and there's stuff happening outside and so forth. That's my perceptions, the different sights and sounds of this present moment, and then the interpretation of the particular situation. But help me out and identify, or perhaps you can help to steer me in examining where the fantasy aspect.
Sure. In short, any interpretation whatsoever is fantasy, is an oversimplification. Any interpretation whatsoever. In short, anything you can say, anything you can think, is inaccurate. Which is fine, it's not a problem, as long as you realize that. It's if you don't realize that it becomes a problem, and you are confusing fantasy, i.e. imagination, for actuality.
So with the valid way of perceiving phenomena, and forgive me for my awkwardness, I'm just really trying to explore and understand as best I can. Mm-hmm. But 2 weeks ago you mentioned the unfindability of objectivity, or that if you look into anything, you can never actually find a particular, well, I forgot how you put it, but there's no thingness to anything. The more you look at it, the more nebulous it becomes. Or
sure, yeah, and that's a way of investigating your experience, to discover that your actual experience does not support this simplistic fantasy, this simplistic fantastical interpretation of things as objectively existing, stable, persistent entities with their own integrity and independent existence and autonomy and so on and so forth.
In order to be able to see that fully, might I need to go through a process of peeling away the onion layers, a progressive series of insights culminating in that type of...
Well, you might, except that, logical analysis is not the best way to do this. The best way to do it is to plunge in whole hog, which is a technical term for be with your experience outside of the context of any interpretation whatsoever, all in one shot. So, in other words, just acknowledge, I don't know what's going on here, which is easy to do because it's ultimately the truth.
But
if you're honest. And then in that context, I don't know what's going on here, but something seems to be going on to some extent, so let me look at it and see what it is. In that context, there's no layers, but this doesn't go away when there's no interpretations. In other words, you don't need to necessarily go through finer and finer layers of interpretation. You can go directly to the raw phenomena which doesn't, when you don't have any interpretations, your experience does not disappear, it does not go away.
Right.
And then you can start from there and then look back, so to speak. So rather than working your way to that, you can jump right to the finish line, so to speak, and then see where you are.
The things that have power to distract, to grab attention, either in terms of desirability or cause fear. That's where the rubber meets the road. Those are the things that actually create afflictive feelings of bondage and so forth.
Yes, but it's subtle and complex. In actuality, it's too subtle and complex to fall into that kind of a description, because desire is actual. It's not a matter of finding yourself in some condition of absolute, vanilla neutrality where you're just sitting like a zombie going, oh. Experience is spontaneously participating in itself, and your nature draws you to qualities of energy that it intrinsically is drawn to as a direct aspect of being. And again, this whole description is not necessarily accurate, but it's indicative. For example, you are drawn to be able to breathe. If you were underwater, you would probably fight your way or try to fight your way to the surface to get a breath of air. It's not like, oh, this is a desire for oxygen, it's an affliction, I need to purge myself of it. It's intrinsic in this energy system that it can be described as you are an energy system that is powerfully inclined towards breathing breathable oxygen, let's say, for example. Or in a less extreme and obvious example, you might really like fresh fruit, and you might dislike chocolate, or I don't know, whatever, right? And it doesn't mean that, you're not supposed to do that. It's all supposed to be plain vanilla. I'm supposed to look at fruit and look at chocolate the same way. Maybe it's the other way around, I don't know, right? But not necessarily, because you are arguably a biochemical system, or whatever that actually consists of, which has certain affinities, in the same sense that you have an affinity for breathable air, and so on. So the fact that within this, energies seem to have certain, you might say, sympathies and antipathies, or attractions and repulsions, is not necessarily an indication of error or confusion or ignorance. It may be that this system is intrinsically like that. This system is intrinsically complex in its dynamism and its interrelationship with itself. See what I mean? Rather than supposedly, in actuality, being some condition of absolute stasis and equilibrium, and any deviation from that is ignorance or a failing, if you see what I mean.
The classical model, and again, Zen, they have a metaphor of the mirror. The mirror reflects everything perfectly, but does not grasp or push away that which is reflected, or that which is placed before it. That's sort of sets the bar at a certain height in terms of what the classical path is pointing toward. That one should be equanimous and not be pushed or pulled toward.
Yes, but one is equanimous because the mirror does not. Let's say the mirror is neutral with regard to what's reflected in it, but the mirror does not. Being neutral with what's reflected in it, it also reflects whatever comes before it. And that is included in that system. So, included in the system of what's reflected in the pure and perfect mirror of your experiencing is a human body that has apparently what we might call metabolic needs. You need food, you need air, you may arguably need some degree of socialization, you may need whatever, And again, we without putting too fine a point on what that any of that actually consists of, because of course all that is a lot of interpretations. There is this absolutely neutral consciousness within which all that appears. So that's already the case. You might say the space of experiencing is sitting here, but within that space, apparent complex conditions seem to be appearing. And just because the mirror is perfectly equanimitous, is equanimitous the right word? Equanimous? Doesn't mean that it's supposed to have equanimitous reflections. You see what I mean? And so this system simultaneously includes this completely effortless, call it the zero state of allowance, right? Your consciousness, anything that appears in your experience appears in your consciousness equally. It's as if your consciousness was a perfectly clean window that whatever was showing up in your experience appeared in. But what appears in that perfect clarity can be tumultuous, can be chaotic, can be dissonant, or can be consonant. I mean, within the mirror of your experience, you can experience an apparently very dysfunctional society that's busy polluting and is destroying its own environment. Whether or not that's actually the case, because of course that's a superficial description, but it is clearly a complex apparent system, right, which is not necessarily in some state of, perfect balanced seesaw without a breath of motion kind of thing, if you see what I mean. So it's not that the equanimity doesn't exist, but you have to find it where it actually is, rather than thinking you're supposed to strong-armedly impose it on everything equally. You see what I mean?
My sense is that true equanimity would come from seeing the no thing, the lack of inherent objectivity, that there's just this open whatever.
Yeah, sure.
And I really sense that hanging out with you. Every time I come here, it hits me in the face. And saw you 2 weeks ago, and I think on some level, the intimation of that stayed with me. Not perfectly, but a little bit.
Great. So. Well, I mean, the point is, it's not about me. It's not about some condition to aspire to. It's about noticing what your experience already is. And again, there's all sorts of spiritual information out there about purifying yourself and perfecting yourself and overcoming afflictions and all this various stuff which involves a lot of striving and effort and achievement. But what I recommend is notice what is actually the case. Notice what your experience actually consists of. And once you see that clearly, then you are competent to assess whether or not any of these remedies are actually needed. And what I would say to you is ultimately they are not, and they never will be, because the problems are not in your individuality. The problem is not seeing what you actually consist of, which transcends your individuality. And that, in other words, take the example of a dream. So in a dream, say you have a nightmare and there's a monster chasing you and you're running away and it's, I don't know what, just some silly dream, right? And that's an apparent condition. I'm in this condition. I have to purify this. I have to get rid of monsters. I have to get strong so I don't run away. I have to learn to fight them. I have to learn to vanquish them. But that's an erroneous interpretation. The actual condition already, even when you're having that dream and lost in it, the actual condition is one of a transcendental dreaming consciousness, which is not even in the dream, not affected by the dream, completely, transparent to the dream, and then all of these virtual conditions appear as the dream, but this transcendent consciousness, which is the only actual entity present, is actually already there, whether it's noticed or not. And if it's not noticed, you think you're in the dream, you're being chased by the monster, I have to take care of this, I have to run away from the monster, I have to, get stronger so I can beat, whatever, right? All of these logical arguments of ways of dealing with a situation that are predicated upon not seeing clearly what the actual situation already is. And once you see the actual situation, the remedies don't need to be applied because it turns out that the dream is not actually happening. It's not an actual event, so therefore apparent conditions within the dream don't need to be addressed. And likewise with our experience here. It's easy to see, oh, I have afflictions, I have unclarities, I'm confused, I this, I that, all of this, my human frailties, my emotionality, my neuroses, all of these things, But again, it turns out that all of these apparent personal conditions in this personal self and this personality and this neurotic, being with its neurotic history and so on and so forth, doesn't actually exist. It's an apparent virtual energy display, let's call it. You can't say what it is, occurring in an absolutely transcendental consciousness, which is what you actually are. And already, always have been, always will be. And so simply seeing that fact as it is, right here, right now, because it is the case right here, right now, as always, then obviates the need for fixing the apparent problems in the apparent individual life because they don't actually exist.
Yeah, that's a refreshingly radical perspective. I resonate with that.
Yeah. Well, I recommend you play with it, But the important thing is always to, the authority is the actuality of your experience, and to really look at it. In other words, don't give undue credit to any particular teaching or philosophy or anything, but rather look at the actuality of your experience and see what's actually true. And you can look at it in the context of the suggestion like that. But the important thing again is not to because it's easy to be subtly seduced into another fantasy of a sophisticated teaching or a sophisticated way of seeing it. But the important thing is the actuality of your experience, which is not a teaching and not an idea. It's an actual present fact. And that is the authority, that is the information that is important to access.
Peter, I don't want to take up too much time, but a final query. So you remember the story of Milarepa, and he, to get revenge on his uncle, he learned black magic, and you know the whole, most people here are familiar with that. So before he was given the meditation instructions, his teacher Marpa made him build this tower and then take it down and rebuild it. All this stuff that he had to do. Would one way of understanding that be that in his world and in his experience of having done some very harmful things, that was medicine appropriate to his dream universe?
Possibly. Another way of seeing that, it was a way of developing the relationship between him and Marpa, so that he would have sufficient resonance with Marpa, so that Marpa could impart to him the true perspective and extricate him from relating to him his being in terms of the apparent circumstances of his life, and move into relating to the actual ontological existence of his being.
Very good. Thank you, Peter.
Sure. You might want to shift your chair a couple inches to the left, otherwise you might end up with a laser sunburn on your lip there, Greg.
liked your comment about we are an energy display in transcendental consciousness. So, and the follow-up comment was play with it. So in the direction of playing with it, differentiating the fantasy from being with the actuality of experience and being with the uninterpreted raw phenomenon. Can you give more examples of that type of practice? Because it's nice when it's being listened to here, but then in the fantasy, when you step out the door, it's less available.
Yeah. The actuality of experience is always available, and it consists essentially of well, let's say, let me back up a little bit. Experience is not a thought. Experience is not an idea. Experience is a qualitative presence. It can be said to have texture, and the absolute indicator of genuine experience is that you cannot pin down exactly what it is. And so the implications of that in practical terms is, for example, if you want to investigate your direct experience, find a textural presence within your experience that you can't say what it is. A good example is light. So light, just vision, is present within your experience. It has definite qualities. It's actually present. It's there whether you're thinking of it or not. It's not a thought. It's not an idea. You can have different ideas about light, and the light does not change as a result of those ideas. So the light objectively exists. It's a textural presence, and you cannot say or get to the bottom of exactly what it is. What exactly is light? Well, I don't know, but here it is. And so that light exhibits all the hallmarks of genuine experience. The same applies to any of the five senses, of course, sensation. It's a textural presence that is clearly present within experience that you can't pin down exactly what it is or how it works. You can't. Another way to put that is you can't describe it precisely and completely. Same. So any of the five senses, touch, smell, taste, sight, sound, and also thought. Thought is an energy presence. As a matter of fact, when you're thinking, the reason you know you're thinking is because there's some qualitative presence in your consciousness. Now, the supposed content of thought, in other words, the storyline, the interpretations, the rationale of thought is wholly imaginary. But it consists of the presence of thought, which is an actual bona fide experiential energy presence. But thought is typically the most challenging area for most people to investigate, because we're so rapidly seduced into spitting off into the semantic content and the conceptual implications of thought. So being with the presence of thought it can be very tricky and seductive, because you're off in a storyline instantly. But being with like that it's hard to think about. I can say, my finger's rubbing on my hand. But the actual experience of what that sensation is just, it's like sparklers going off in consciousness. And, it's clearly actual, it's clearly present, and yet there's no way to wrap your head around it. You can't say what it is. You can't say how is it recognized? How do I recognize that? How do I tell that from vision? How can I tell that's not something I'm seeing? How can I tell that's something I'm feeling? And you look at that and you go, I can effortlessly, but I can't wrap my head around it. I can't know how it happens. It's clearly and explicitly mysterious, which again is a hallmark of actual real experience. And by being with experience directly like this, you come to see what it truly is. You come to see its inconceivable, literally infinite range of qualities that it can present as. You come to see the extremely slippery modes of its dynamism, the way it's entirely and completely unstable. Experience, any form in experience has absolutely no persistence. It instantly morphs into something else. It's very, very slippery. You can't tell how it appears or how it disappears. You can't tell how it's perceived. In other words, it just, the more you are with it, the more paradoxical it clearly shows itself to be, because it's so specific and so explicit and so completely unfindable in terms of trying to pin it down or define it or really get a handle on what's actually happening. So this just a simple investigation like that will clearly reveal how incredibly strange and trippy and dreamlike this experience actually is, in the face of our our usual mode of manufacturing and interpretation. Oh yeah, we're just sitting here and it's Berkeley and this and that and the other, which sort of imposes a pseudo-stability and a pseudo-objectivity onto this really slippery actuality of these fields of textual presence that are just constantly, breathing with their own life in experience.
Sometimes it's hard to break out of that objectivity overlay, or it's
it can be really hard. But the best way to deal with it again is don't take it on head on. Don't try to get out of it. Just let it sit here and sort of bypass it and go over here. Because when you fight with it or struggle with it or try and turn it off or whatever directly, you actually sort of give it more energy by acknowledging it. You feed it. Whereas if you just sort of bypass it and go to something like this, it's okay, objectivity, Berkeley, Hillside Club, but meanwhile, this is happening, and all of a sudden, you're over there, and you're in speechlessness. What can I say about that? And then bang, you go back into your worldview, and your definition's fine, but you can always go over here anytime you want, because actuality underlies all of this worldview, and they don't really touch each other. The worldviews don't actually stop or stymie or cut back on actuality. So you might think of it as two worlds that coexist. And the more exposure you have to noticing actuality, the less grip that your worldview will have on you, without needing to leave it or dismantle it or even address it at all. You don't need to not have a worldview. You don't need to take apart or dismantle or somehow cease the activities of your misunderstandings. Just see the context that they exist in, and they'll reveal themselves as impotent and pointless over a period of time. So it's kind of a Trojan horse strategy. You just sort of you sneak out the back door and you play around with and you don't worry about the rules so much.
It's right there, always at hand.
Yeah, exactly. And the more you access it, the more you notice and appreciate how right here it is, and how completely untouched it is by all of our arrogant, labeling and imposing conceptual worldviews on it. Reality is cannot be damaged. It cannot be made impure. It cannot be made unreal. No matter how much unreality you try and throw against it, the unreality just sits here like a bubble sitting in reality, because reality is the only context that anything can exist in. So it's untouched. It's adamantine. And reality is vast, powerful, and meaningful, and our worldviews and our conceptual structures are small, puny, and emasculated. So, I mean, right away when you begin to notice this direct experience, you go, "Whoa! Wait a minute! It's no contest." I mean, reality just trumps unreality every which way from Sunday. That's just like, there's no. It's not like there. It's not like there's anything to decide on. There's no competition.
I had a question. When you say reality versus non-reality, I get the non-reality is the conceptual reality, the kind of instrumental reality, and the reality that you when you talk about the reality of our actual experience, presencing, that's sort of more like kind of absolute, right? So space. It's vast. I get it. I get a little tripped up with the word reality, and maybe I needn't do. Maybe I'm thinking it through a Buddhist lens or some other interpretive lens. But when I think of reality as in actual presence reality, then I think I can't get out of my definition or my languaging of reality as being something that is so. Whereas when you're in actual experience, it's your own particular experience of what is so of the present moment. I don't know if that's clear, but...
Yeah. Don't worry so much about the words, and especially don't worry about the word reality. Probably a better word to use, rather than reality or experience or anything else, the word this. So instead of saying, well, what is reality, just say, what is this? What is this? And this will clearly reveal itself, because this is that which is this, which is here. And you don't need to worry too much about the words here, or the word this, or the word, look at because this is not a word. right? This that is present here is not a word. It is not a notion. It does not need to be defined. You can define it one way or the other, but it doesn't care. It still just sits here and is what it is. So the point is to be with that isness, or more accurately maybe to be with this isness in its own terms, and don't worry about whether it's real or not real or this or that, because that's all just going back into conceptualization. Whereas this is a textural presence, which is not a concept. The presence of, we call it light in your field of vision. Now mind you, light in your field of vision is words, obviously, is concepts, but what that refers to, this actual presence, is not a thought. It's a textural presence that is a fact, whatever you call it. You can call it unreal. Okay, my vision is unreal. But it doesn't go away, does it? It still is a textual presence. So the point is to notice this textural presence and to let yourself be with it nakedly, be with it without being too heavy-handed in terms of holding what it is, and especially be with it freshly, be with it assuming that the old ways you've thought of it might not be true. A good sort of a koan to approach this in terms of is, what if I have absolutely no idea what this is? Right here, right now. What if I have absolutely no idea what this is? And then be with it like that. And see, and just look what it is. Without thinking about it, just feel it, explore it, look at it. And you'll find yourself thinking, and that's fine. So thoughts happen, concepts happen. But then you look, hear this in this textual presence, and you notice concepts happen in their own little conceptual place, which we usually call the mind or something, which is kind of hard to define, it's quite hard to pin down itself because it's real. But so concepts are happening, but they don't get in the way of vision, for example. They don't get in the way of hearing. They don't get in the way of sensation. So you begin to notice that concepts don't actually have much to do with presence. And they're not the enemy of presence. They're not the opposite of presence. It's our confusing them for actuality that causes the problems, not concepts themselves. And when you sensitize yourself to being with this as a textual presence and feeling it, you will notice that when concepts happen, they happen in their own realm, let's say, in their own space, and they don't in any way impinge upon this textual presence. So they're not a problem. And instead of magnetically going to the concepts compulsively and addictively, we can let them be where they are, and they dance around. Sometimes we visit them, and sometimes we leave them. But this textural presence is always right here, exactly what it is, whatever the concepts are doing, wherever they're doing it or not. So it's a matter of becoming sensitive to letting ourselves access, letting ourselves feel this textural presence that is actual. It's actual. It's here. It's being itself, regardless of what you think of it or call it or not.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And just, it's important not to trivialize this, which is easy to do, again, conceptually. This textual presence is profound. This textual presence is literally the absolute. And you discover that through exploring it, through being with it. So just this being with this textual presence and let yourself feel it is the most powerful spiritual practice. And, reality is always felt. We have all these words for experiencing, but they're misnomers. We say, I'm seeing my vision. Seeing is a euphemism for feeling. Consciousness feels light. Consciousness feels sound. Sound is experience is a contact sport. Light is felt. Sound is felt. Sensation is felt. Smells are felt. Thought is felt. It's not like these energies are happening out there somewhere and I'm over here somewhere and there's this mysterious seeing or smelling or tasting or hearing that somehow bridges the gap. On the contrary, these energies are appearing within consciousness, and consciousness feels these energies occurring. They sizzle, they tingle, they have a... That's what presence means. Presence means that they touch you, that you feel them. And all experience is like that. All experience is essentially contactual. Is that a word? Is now. So experience is like swimming. You're swimming in energy. And doing that is vital. It is informative. It resonates and magnifies meaningfulness and intelligence and transcendental fulfillment and all sorts of other things which the words turn into bullshit, but which the reality of which is unspeakably profound.
So I have one more question. When you said a short while ago that when you're in the world of actual presence, it becomes so I can't think of the word. Maybe it's delicious, or that over a period of time you might prefer it to this other world, and that's where it can get tricky, and I know that's not what you're saying. You said it's sort of almost like there are two worlds, but it's really that the actuality is always underneath, or it's in everything. It's in all of your experience, including the mind or the conceptual reality. It might be illusory at one level because we get caught up, we go down the rabbit hole, we're in our mind, we're in our thoughts. But underneath is always the texture of presence. Yeah. So it's always there. It's just a matter of sort of exposing it, being there. And when you said it was almost preferable, I know that's not what you meant, but the likes of all of myself or others could go into that duality from that place of preferring that as a different world from this world over here that's somehow... And and you alluded to that when you said we're not trying to be up against this world, because then we just get right back into the rabbit hole again. Because it's more like Pema Chodron, when she says thinking, she just says, "Oh, there's thinking. Carry on. Keep doing what you're doing," and then she goes back to meditation. So it's noticing it and not making it a big deal, not being up against it, not undermining it, not trying to overcome it. But if we start to kind of get into a language of preferring, we get into trouble too. So I'm not saying that's what you're saying, but that's where I would go.
Yeah, sure. This is, this whole issue is a little complex because it looks very different at different phases of your relationship to it, or different phases of your unfoldment to it. So, at one way of being with experience, it seems as though your conceptual world is dominant and is real and is true, and it exists over the basis of sensory experience and so on. But still, in all, the dominant feature, the dominant meaningfulness and point of orientation is the conceptual world. And then as you begin to explore that, there can seem to be two very distinctive realms that can seem to be mutually exclusive. It can seem to be, well, you get snapped from one and then the other, and it can be a little schizophrenic ish and a little kind of disorienting and so on and so forth. But then ultimately, as you penetrate deeper, or let's say open more fully and develop more familiarity with the actual nature of direct experience, you come to see more profoundly the way in which our intellectual and mental experience is actually an aspect of this fundamental experience, this fundamental, essentially transcendental actual experience. But again, depending upon sort of your own maturity in terms of where you are in relationship to unfolding to this, it can look very, very different and even seem opposite. In one phase it can seem opposite to the ways it seems in other phases, and so on and so forth. As a motive force for this exploration, the nice feature of this is that actual experience is intrinsically seductive. It has a lot of qualities that are immediately apparent, such as it's nutritious, it is satisfying, it has well, it feels good. It's fulfilling intrinsically, and so as you begin to embark more fully and more directly on a program of noticing the actuality of your experience, right away it starts to pull you into it because it's attractive, it's wonderful. And again, at different points your relationship to that may seem in various ways, but ultimately it resolves itself as one thing, essentially. Although you really only come to see that in its fullness when you have a very profound and open experience of it, to really be immersed in the perspective as it is. But different strategies at different times seem called for too, depending upon where you're at the time. But the fundamentally is go to noticing direct experience as a general rule when you can. And a good approach is to do it lightly and playfully. Don't do it too obsessively or heavy-handedly or dutifully, because then if you try and turn it into a practice or a task or an obsession, you actually subtly re-energize a conceptual view, or define yourself as needy, or define yourself as incomplete, which just again subtly re-energizes a conceptual, a subtle, fantastic orientation to your experience. Whereas actual experience is very playful, it's very open, it's very non-goal oriented, and so using that stance in approaching it, you resonate with what it is more fully and directly, and so more effortlessly slip into its nature. And if you find yourself drifting away from that into conceptual orientation, just let go. And okay, cool, and you go hang out in your conceptual stuff for a while. But eventually, before long, sooner or later, again, you'll have access to, you'll notice something, and wow, and you'll just go into start tripping on some aspect of your experience or whatever. And then, okay, so you enjoy that again, sort of playfully. And every time you do that, it's cumulative. Every time you do that, you go a little farther. You actually build up a kind of a momentum. It builds up a kind of a power in terms of shifting the balance, of orienting more profoundly towards your direct experience and less profoundly towards your worldview.
Peter. Could you explain a little bit more about the texture of the lights?
Sure. It can't really be explained. It's more a matter of noticing. Noticing the range, the literally infinite range of texture that light has, that any experience has for that matter. Any experience could be said to consist of a dynamic, energetic presence, let's say. And of course, you can't define what that is because it's not conceptual. You can't collapse that down to ideas or words. You can't say exactly what it is. But you can directly notice that any actual experience has a multidimensionality that is limitless. And this multidimensionality may at first seem to be very subtle, but again, by being with this, by being with your raw experience as it is, it teaches you how to be with it, and it sensitizes you to appreciating it more and more fully as it actually is. And this range of textures that any experience has, light in this case, is it's seductive. It will pull you into it and reveal more and more fully on an ongoing basis the range of what's actually there. And you'll discover that any actual experience literally opens into limitlessness in terms of the richness of what is there. And again, you can't quantify or specify or define what this richness consists of, because it's not like that. It's not linear. It's not something that you can, even really indicate, let alone draw a circle around or say what it is and how it relates to other things. It's more a kind of a nuance of richness and dimensionality. Words fail, but words fail very specifically because we're beyond the verbal. We're into non-verbal actuality, which conveys an infinite quality and quantity of information, as opposed to words, which are relatively finite bits of information.
So the red and green lights are a big breadcrumb for us.
Sure, they're fun and silly, which is good, and they're a little unconventional, which is good, and they're a little disorienting. They're a little unusual, which is good. I think one of the stumbling blocks of our experience is we tend to numb ourselves with normalcy. We tend to be in situations in the same way again and again, our sort of social conventions and so on, which basically reinforces our dullness, reinforces our complacency and our non-questioning, our non-rocking the boat. Whereas something like this, which is obviously a little weird, a little silly, a little strange, is a little subtly provocative in the sense of being, what's this about? What's going on with this? So it's all just a hint for encouraging playfulness, encouraging freshness, encouraging being with things in a new way or in an unusual way, which alone is very, very, very powerful. Just that alone is enormously powerful. The spiritual problem is essentially self-inflicted. We dull ourselves down. We numb ourselves. We contain ourselves and keep ourselves on the tracks and in the channel. Whereas if you just let go of that a little bit and just loosen up, just try something new, try something different, step outside the box a little bit. Just that alone is huge, is enormously powerful. And just little silly things like this is just sort of a small move in that direction.
You talked about the unfolding to the nature of direct experience. And the way you talked about it was kind of walking through the phases of that unfolding, the phases of enlightenment in some way. Probably not the way you'd like to hear it be said, but there were phases that you talked about to becoming more aware of direct experience. To the point of orienting profoundly to the direct experience and less to your worldview. And you, as you talked about those phases, at the point of that last phase, you talked about how a profound experience kind of could open you up to that, or there was, I guess it was a profound experience that would open you up to that. So do you have any story of your own experience of that profundity that was like that moment of more? Again, you talked about the phases. That was more towards that more mature phase of orienting more towards direct experience and less to the small world view.
Yeah. In terms of stories of my experience, that's one thing, and I'll get to that in a sec. In terms of phases, I think it's probably clearer to say there may be apparent phases. It's not that these phases are necessarily discrete and catalogable and, first you go here and then you go here and then you go here. And it's not like that so much as that the process of letting go of our conceptual orientation, letting go of our habit of orienting towards ourselves as we think we are, and moving into orienting towards what actually is, I would say will typically look like it goes through phases. But these phases are subjective and are virtual in the sense that they'll be tailored to where you are and what you're going through, sort of, so to speak, rather than something that's objectively catalogable as, well, there's 8 phases, and first you go through this, and then, it's not kind of like that. So I just wanted to clarify that. In terms of my own experience, I don't know if it was unusual or not, and as these things go, but I in the context of another being, I had a profound and very complete experience of actuality. I was very young at the time, and it was very disorienting to me. In fact, I landed in a mental institution for 5 weeks after that, and essentially spent the next 24 years following that trying to sort out and make sense of what I had experienced. So in my case, I kind of got thrown in the deep end and then found my way out of the pool, and then was exploring in the shallow end till then, and then, working my way in deeper, what have you. I mean, I don't know, very loosely speaking, who knows what it was actually like. But anyway, so again, I don't know if that's typical for people or not. It seems as though for most people, or for many people, this kind of thing sort of proceeds on the level of kind of little quantum jumps, which can seem to be very slight at the time, and also some of them can occasionally seem to be big ones and sometimes small ones and so on and so forth. And I think this is fairly typical, and I think it's very individualized and unique to each person in terms of what the sort of pattern of things looks like in terms of the stages or phases or what have you. I don't know if that's what you were looking for, but
thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
One other one. I have to go off the top of my head. So it's always kind of interesting, or actually more fun, when you're experiencing someone other's work or view of the world, such as a movie, and you can tell that the creator, the director, the writer, whoever, kind of got something that you feel is profound or meaningful about life. It's like, yeah, they see that kind of more nuanced view or that more interpretive. Interpret is the right word, but anyway, some type of profundity about life that's like, yeah, they kind of get it. Are there any stories, parables, books of fiction, cartoons, movies that you've come across that showed you like the creator kind of understands this more ultimate nature of experience, right? A lot of things come up shallow and come up meaningless in a lot of ways because it's just they're shallow and meaningless in their interpretation.
Sure.
But there's some interpretations that are just more profound and more in touch. Have you come across things?
Oh yeah, many. Sure, lots and lots.
You want to throw any out there?
Yeah, sure. Okay. There was a movie, I think it was a British movie back from, it must have been the early 70s, maybe the late 60s. It was called Oh Lucky Man. I recommend to you very highly. Of course, we have obvious things like The Matrix and that sort of thing. Matrix, V for Vendetta. I don't know, there's so many. I mean, it's just...
Cartoons, parables.
Yeah, well, cartoons, oh gosh, there's so many cartoons. It's hard to... I could probably sit and think about it and come up with a lot of them. But just off the top of my head, I don't know that I have... I can put my finger on many.
It's always fun.
I mean, parables are, many of the classic parables, the classic spiritual parables, of Christ and so on and so forth, are obviously very profound. Again, I don't know, it's sort of hard to...
Transcendence, those types of things.
Sorry?
Transcendence, stories of transcendence. Is that...
Yeah, sure. And again, transcendence... Transcendence doesn't need to be obviously transcendental to be profoundly transcendental, which is why a lot of these sorts of, as you say, cartoons and parables and all that can seem to be relatively superficial, and yet, if you really go into what's there, it's wow, and ultimately anything whatsoever is that, There's nothing but absolute transcendence. There is no form which is not absolutely transcendent, and I don't mean that as hyperbole, I mean that literally, absolutely transcendent, period. So, you could look at the dirt on the floor, literally, and you are looking at the divine. Simple fact. So, the implications of that in terms of the sort of target you're looking at is, anything rightly understood is just incredibly profound. Even people, stupid examples and dull examples still reveal transcendence because that's the only thing that is really here. So of course that's what's going to be revealed. And the thing about transcendence is it's more is appreciating it or recognizing it. So it's more on the, it's more kind of the beauty's in the eye of the beholder thing. It's not about the form itself. Some forms have a particularly powerful resonance and a particular integrity in terms of being gem-like and really just, shining out. But any form, virtually any form, rightly understood, is ultimate profundity. So, but there's a lot of great stuff, a lot of fun stuff out there.
Thanks.
Sure.
Could you talk about what the open doorway means?
Sure.
I'm just experiencing things morphing,
Yeah.
It's just falling away, and it's
You got it.
just open and open.
Yeah.
One thing opens into the next and the
Yeah.
next, and it's like this is free fall
It's free fall.
of
Yeah. Well, I call my website The Open Doorway because that's a very direct indication of of the transcendental nature of reality. Which sounds very highfalutin. What I mean that very concretely is that any and all experience, if you are with it, immediately opens into something else that is more and other and greater. And that opens into something else, and so on, forever. So experience, being with any experience whatsoever, intrinsically is a flowing into something else that is more. So it's as if there's a doorway that's standing open, and so you walk through it, and you're somewhere else. And there's a door, which is a doorway that's standing open, and you walk through that, and it's somewhere else, which is a doorway that's standing open, and you walk through that, and it's somewhere else, and so on and so forth. And this is, to me, this is a very nice metaphor for what experience is like. And when you notice experiences like that, you notice its instability, you notice its multidimensionality. I mean, experience is more like voyaging through hyperspace than it is like sitting somewhere and experiencing something and then experiencing something else. And noticing that is coming to be more profoundly with what this is. And to me, that image kind of captures that rather concisely.
It's so inviting when the edges of things. I mean, the beyond. It's like anything you notice, it's like it just goes so much greater, and then it just opens and opens.
Opens and opens and opens forever and ever and ever. Amen. And I mean that. Amen.
How I look at the difference between when I'm stuck and then when I'm experiencing, and sometimes how the stuckness does that. The stuckness will seem stuck, and then I work with it somehow, and then it begins to open, and then it turns into its opposite.
Yeah. Stuckness can't exist because experience intrinsically opens never-endingly to newness. And any stuckness that presents itself in experience will intrinsically and inherently open into something other than that. And all you need to do is notice that experience is that intrinsically, and then stuckness is nothing to fear, because stuckness is just a word for a doorway that you happen to be going through at the moment, into another doorway which you're going through at the moment, into another doorway which you're going through at the moment, forever. And there's no last door, there's no first door, but it always moves into richness. And stuckness is just, a name for some particular door, but it's not closed. So stuckness is intrinsically unstuck. It's sort of hard to make a jail out of open doorways. That's probably a good place to stop for tonight. Thank you all so much for coming. We're going to have a little get-together afterwards. If you'd like to stick around, we'll have some snacks and maybe something to drink if you would enjoy hanging out informally. Please stay if you'd like. Otherwise, have a lovely rest of your life.